Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. My name is Janine Donnelly. I am the Manager of Webinars for IBM Systems Magazine, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Today's webinar is brought to you by IBM System Magazine and our Survey Platinum sponsor, CorreLog, Inc. In Part 1 of today's webinar, Doug Rock and Jim Mutzler will present the results of the 2016 Z-Systems Security Survey. Doug is publisher of IBM Systems Magazine. In that role, Doug oversees the editorial and sales staffs at IBM Systems Media. Doug has been covering the high technology industry since 1992. Prior to coming to the magazine in 2002, Doug worked for IBM for 6 years. Jim is the senior writer for IBM Systems Magazine. He's been covering the tech sector for more than 20 years and has written about any number of topics over that time, including mainframe security. In Part 2 of today's webinar, CorreLog will provide insight to the security disconnect caused by enterprises working across the two worlds of IT, mainframe versus distributed. To present, we are delighted to have George Foucher and Peter Mills. George is President and CEO of CorreLog, Inc. George has served as President of CorreLog since its inception and has been a successful software entrepreneur for over 30 years. Peter is currently the Vice President of Development and Support at CorreLog. He has more than 35 years of enterprise experience, having previously served as a software engineer, systems architect, business analyst, project manager, and development manager. So we have lots of expertise with us today. With our introductions complete, Doug, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Great. Thanks, Janine, and thanks, everybody, for joining us today. This is Doug Rock. I'm the publisher of IBM Systems Media, and Jim and I, and primarily myself, but Jim, we're going to keep this relatively fluid. Jim will comment, in particular, if I just butcher something, and or if he's got some information that he thinks is pertinent. Jim wrote the special report that we did on mainframe security. It's in the September-October issue of the mainframe edition of our publication, so you should check that out. The URLs are here for the article. It's on one is the website article. The other is the digital edition. You don't have to memorize these or do a screen capture or anything. We'll send out an email that has those URLs in them so that you can get to that article online if you don't get the print issue. So just for a little bit of context, in the summer of this year, we sent out an email to our newsletter and magazine readers. It's about 17,000 emails were sent. We got a total respondents number of about 546. We took a look at that data from the survey, and Jim put together the special report from, just the analysis of that data, but also the last question that we asked in the survey was, would you be willing to be interviewed for the special report that we were producing? And we had many people who raised their hands and said that they would participate, which was great. And so Jim interviewed a couple of readers. Their quotes and information is in the special report, but he also interviewed some subject matter experts. So we had a couple folks from IBM who were also interviewed for that special report. At the beginning of the survey that we sent out, we asked for some demographic information. So first question we asked about was what their professional title or their role was. And as you can see, the many of these folks were system analyst programmers. Also, though, consultants, which is obviously a broad title, but IT management, CIO, IT manager, director of IT were also well represented, and then it was relatively even among the other titles. These are mainframe companies or organizations, so this should be no surprise, but gross revenues for these organizations in 2016 were high. By far, 35, almost 36% had revenues of $1 billion or more in 2016. From an industry perspective, again, this isn't completely shocking. Banking and finance was number one, and that's typically what we see from our readership. The computer software number was high. Looked into that a little bit, and part of that I think was from a consulting standpoint, but then the consultant number was also high. So these are just the top industries that responded. Government, military was relatively high, as was insurance, and again, not a big surprise there from an industry standpoint. How many employees in your organization? Again, this dovetails with kind of the revenue numbers, but 5,000 or more was 60+%, and by far and away the largest number. So again, these are not just from a revenue standpoint, but also from an employee standpoint. These are big organizations. How concerned are you about mainframe security? And obviously, people are concerned. It's 90% are very concerned or somewhat concerned. Which again shouldn't be a huge surprise to folks, but obviously gives us a lot of fodder for content and for discussion. So we'll get into some of the reasons they're concerned about security and kind of get a little bit into some granular detail here too as we go forward. Do you believe the need for IBM mainframe security skills is increasing as folks on the mainframe side, users, retire? And last year we had a very successful research survey that we did on this exact issue on mainframe skills, and a lot of attendees for that webinar, and obviously it affects many different areas, and security is one of them. As expertise leaves the industry, how is that void filled? Annual budget for IBM mainframe security. The largest number on here is can't say or don't know. I think part of that may have been that there were many people who were system analysts and programmers that may not have been privy to that information. Next highest number on there at almost 12% was a security budget on the mainframe of over $200,000, which is relatively hefty. What keeps you up at night? What are the security concerns that you have? And I think many people in the general public would think that it was this kind of nefarious external hacker. And while that you'll see that it is a concern, actually it's the internal user that IBM mainframe users are most concerned about. And so you have, here's Dave, right? In this corner we have firewalls, encryption, antivirus software, et cetera. And in this corner, there's Dave. And so this bears this out right here. So what types of mainframe-related security threats most currently concern you? And please select the top three threats. So the top two were authorized system user or accessed or credentialed or unauthorized users. The external hacker number was at 50%. And Jim, I thought one of the things in the article, you were talking to Fred Shea, who's the mainframe storage manager at IBM, and one of the quotes I thought that was good in the report that you put together was he said, the risk from people already within the circle of trust, people misusing data they're already authorized to access, disgruntled, malicious, or careless employees, that's really where the challenge comes in. I don't know if you can comment on that a little bit, or if there were others in the article that kind of mirrored that concern.
Yeah, according to Fred and other people I spoke with, it's not only authorized users who may be disgruntled, but also unauthorized users who may be gaining access to data that they shouldn't be gaining access to. And that was a pretty big concern, actually, because that has to do with policies and perhaps not ensuring that those people are cut off from that data.
Right. So you talked about policies. The other aspect of that is what kind of software do they have on hand to kind of to mitigate some of that. And I thought this was kind of interesting that from an external security management solution perspective, 62%, almost 63% said that they don't deploy external security management solutions, while about 37% said that they did. Was there any discussion from some of the readers that you spoke to, or anything that you uncovered as to why external security management solutions were not deployed? Was it a cost issue, or did that come up in some of the research that you did?
Yeah, it definitely has to do with budget as well as complexity, because although there are some very good kind of block security programs out there, a lot of them need add-ons. So you could be looking at 120 tools from 50 or so vendors, and that adds to the complexity of that environment. Mm-hmm. But regarding the budget, that needs to come from top down and from management, so people can actually start exploring their options. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We did delve down a little bit, got into the weeds a little bit, and asked specifically about what kind of security threats people were most concerned about, and specifically we asked about mobile computing security. Data privacy was number one, followed by access control, and then mobile device loss or theft was third. And Jim, again, I know that you had some interesting comments from some folks on this too. In particular, I think the data privacy thing is interesting. I know of a very large organization that I have some relationship with, where basically all the employees, if they can access the email server from that particular organization on their phone, then they have to have a certain software program loaded on that device, or it could be a mobile, could be a tablet. And essentially, the organization can basically not only shut down that device if they feel it's necessary, and/or erase the data. So, I mean, the data privacy thing can go a couple of ways too, right? I mean, I know of employees that work for that organization said, I'm just not going to access email on my, on that particular device because I don't want you having that kind of control. So that kind of cuts both ways. But then I thought the mobile device loss or theft was another thing I know that IT organizations are concerned about, and I think another area that you kind of talked about in the article that you did.
Yeah, well, one of the respondents to the survey said, if he lost his iPhone, for example, he would be devastated because that's his life on there. But translating that to the business world, if people are using tablets, for example, to check in rental cars, they have a lot of information on those, even though it's being sent to the back end. But if those were to be lost or stolen, then people could gain access to that information, whether it's held locally or on the back end.
Right.
So that was a big thing.
Yeah, I think about travel, and so many of us do travel, and I saw the stat somewhere, the number of laptops that are left at the security stations at airports, and I just cannot imagine how, the concern that IT folks have from a security standpoint over mobile device loss or theft. So it's a large issue. What do you consider to be the greatest cloud computing security threats? That's another area that's obviously in the news a lot, cloud computing. Number one was keeping all cloud data secure from outsiders. Number two is monitoring your cloud security infrastructure. And I apologize, some of these are cut off, but maintaining regulatory compliance was another one. And I know particularly from a regulatory compliance issue, Jim, a lot of the readers here were in the area of finance, industry of finance, or government military. Can you talk about that a little bit? I think those folks are the ones who are really concerned in particular about compliance.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a very big thing. Because, of course, they whether it's HIPAA regulations or other, the credit card industry regulations, it's very important that, of course, that data is kept secure. And using a cloud is a good thing, but, it has to really be locked down. So, especially in a hosted environment or a hybrid environment. And that's what some of the people I spoke with talked about, keeping their very secure data within the data center, and then some of the other data on the, whether it's hosted outside or a public cloud. So that was a big concern.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. What do you think would most help address security-related issues at your organization? By far and away, increased education on current security software strategy and policies was number one. Next was additional security software solutions, which is interesting considering, going back a couple of slides, we saw that there's a large portion of folks that don't have external or have not added additional software applications. Greater emphasis from management on security threats, and again, that goes back to policies. Jim talked about that a little bit previously. So, next one, does your organization have information security policy or policies? And 82% of respondents said yes. 12% said they didn't know, which is a little disconcerting. What security-related policies does your organization follow? Check all that apply. And so by far and away, password, as you might expect, password, passphrase policy. Number one, monitoring and audit policy, very closely tied to workstation and configuration policy is another one. But obviously many, many policies in place here across the board. Any discussions or points of interest, Jim, that from a policy standpoint that you kind of unearthed during your investigation?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's checking on making sure that the passphrase policies follow the workstation configuracy policy, those policies all need to be audited. And it's important that it's not done internally. There should be an external auditor coming in to look at all of those, because you might become complacent if you do an internal audit as opposed to an external audit. So I think that's very important to do that and do it regularly as well.
Okay, great. And another question we asked was, how confident are you in your organization's security plan? Pretty confident here. I mean, you don't see there's 3% that are not confident at all, which has got to be terrifying. But for the most part, folks are confident. You've got 50, 60% that are very confident, to confident, somewhat confident at 33%. But in general, it seems like folks are relatively secure with the plan that their organization has in place. Does your organization perform security audits on a regular basis? 73, 74% said yes. Nothing really surprising there. How often do they perform these audits? And the number one was annually at almost 38%, every 6 months at 19.3%, and every 3 months at 19%. And I bet if we went back and looked at industries, I think it'd be interesting to kind of delve into that a little bit. But my guess is that some of the industries are doing that on a much more regular basis than others. What security-related areas are examined during your scheduled audit? Check all that apply. Software security was number one. The next two were tied at policy and governance and access control, or those were the third. Network security was number two at 77.5%. What risks are you most concerned about in the next 5 years? We saw a very similar slide previously that talked about what they feel currently are the biggest threats. The one change here is that external hackers now moves into number two. Unauthorized users was number two previously. So the threat of an outside hacker looks to be a larger area of concern as we move forward in time here. But again, 70% authorized system user access or credentialed was number one. Okay, so that. Go ahead.
If I can interject
Sure.
real quick, Doug. What was interesting about that is it's always a catch-up game with security. So that's why policies and audits, I think, are so critical, because you really have to keep on top of what's going on. It's certainly not going away, as we've read a lot about recently. And I think the policies and audits are really key to that. And just, reading the news and the industry publications.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll send, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, we'll send out an email that has links to the special report that we published in September. So would urge all of you to read that. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to George. George?
Okay. Thank you very much, Doug, Jim. Good work. Thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar sponsored by CorreLog, and really also for providing all the valuable input. We're going to talk a little bit about bridging that security gap. What is that? That's the difference between having everything monitored or almost everything and leaving the mainframe out. And that's kind of where we're going to focus today. This whole survey gives us an opportunity to summarize the ZOS security survey and provide you with an overview of how we can help you address these possible security gaps, as well as provide added regulatory compliance for some of the things that Jim mentioned and Doug mentioned: HIPAA, PCI compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley, FISMA, and more. Also, this will help to assure that your company will pass their audits. Platform monitoring is we're going to focus on the mainframe today. For those who may not know, CorreLog is the leader in the mainframe security agent technology to first introduce real-time alerting that includes ZOS, RACF, ACF2, Top Secret, Unix system services, Linux, IND dollar file, and more. Since we're all mainframes, we're going to talk a lot of buzzwords on that side of the house. You also may and will hear some new buzzwords, such as in the security area, such as file integrity monitoring, which assures the integrity of all of the operating system files. Privileged user activity, which monitors all the activity of people like system admins, sysprogs, DBAs, network administrators, and having the ability to forward those to the Security Operations Center or the SIEM. These are all implemented as part of different regulations you keep hearing about. So real-time event feeds are critical to integrating into the SIEM or SOC. SIEM stands for Security Information and Event Management, and there's a whole lot of those products out there. Most companies have these sitting out in what they call their Security Operations Center. So it's critical to feed live events or real-time events into those Security Operations Centers. At CorreLog, we've bridged the gap between traditional mainframe event reports and state-of-the-art distributed security SIEM and SOC systems, which are now monitoring things like Windows and Linux servers, firewalls and routers in modern networks. Until recently, mainframe security, monitoring, event notification, and regulatory compliance was left up to products invented in the dark ages, typically in batch mode. Seriously, though, the technologies available today for disparate distributed systems can now be used by all mainframe systems, and thereby taking advantage of the latest things like GUI dashboards, real-time alerting, not a report that arrives tomorrow that tells you got hacked into yesterday. I like to say CorreLog allows you to call the doctor, not the coroner. As you can see on the right, a lot of them are listed there, the SIEM systems. If your companies are using products like IBM QRadar, ArcSight, HP, ArcSight, RSA, Splunk, NetIQ, or any others that are listed up there, CorreLog agents can format and configure events to be fed directly into these tools from all of the services and system events on the mainframe side. This alone can immediately satisfy some of your regulatory requirements, such as having to log all security events from all platforms into one system, and certainly on a separate system, because you don't want the fox watching the hen house. Some of the security events that you may have not been familiar with are things like file integrity monitoring, which is ensuring the integrity of all of the system files on the mainframe or any other platforms. Things like separation of duty, which I kind of just briefly went over, where you make sure that the people doing things on one platform aren't the same people that get alerted that somebody's doing something. Also, privileged user activity. What kind of things are systems, programmers, database administrators, and network administrators, what are they really doing? And so on. Additionally, the beauty of this design is that we know change is inevitable. And when your company decides they want to convert to a different SIEM or a different security operations center, utilizing a product like CorreLog that takes all of those events and puts them into any of these output platforms makes it easy as a flick of a switch. Probably the most crucial thing in integrating mainframe events to the rest of the enterprise is the correlation capabilities. And correlation capabilities, oops, sorry about that. And correlation capabilities and also the results in real time. One of the things about correlation is that you can take multiple events, and as opposed to just making it one event will kick off, let's say, a recovery action, you can have multiple events in correlation, like who is accessing the system at night, what time of day are they monitoring it, and what location are they coming in from, the IP originating address or the country of that originating address. What are the system admins accessing? And are they downloading it as well or backing it up? Very important to know those things. So you can have multiple events, kick off, and alert. In conclusion, education, as you noticed, seemed to be listed in the survey as something practically everybody's interested in. CorreLog has a wealth of information on the website. Feel free to take a look. That's all listed, as they mentioned, on the last page, and all of this will be distributed to you in the future. Right now, I'll pass over to Peter Mills, and he's going to show you some of the real-time examples of how integrating the mainframe into the distributed world will work for you. Peter, it is all yours.
Ready to take some questions from our attendees?
Great.
All right. First question. Management has asked for compliance reports. Are there any of these that come out of the box? This would be certainly a CorreLog question.
Yeah, I can take that. In fact, Peter went through that. You saw that we have the audit reports built into the product so that you can select the ones that you want. We collect all the pertinent data based upon the regulatory requirements, and then we store that data so that you can do reports and actually have them scheduled to be sent to users on a time-initiated basis as well. So management gets the reports they need, and therefore you pass your audits. Good question.
Now, before we jump back to a question on the survey, I want to take this one, and perhaps George or Peter, you can take this too. How much CPU do the agents on ZOS consume when collecting the data from SMF? In other words, what's the overhead of running the agents?
That's a good question. Peter, you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's very little, actually. Our products, we've tested them, and some of our customers have reported, up to 40,000 messages per CPU second coming through, and because you'd run each agent on each LPAR, the workload is kind of spread across all of your LPARs. But one agent running on one LPAR really doesn't use that much. We're seeing less than 3% in some cases, the thing to watch is, for example, with DB2, when you're turning on those traces, you got to be careful. Don't turn all of the traces on because, of course, there's going to be some overhead there. Taking the SMF records from the SMF exits in real time, very, very little overhead, and you'll find it is going to be fine. So we do have reports on our system that tells you exactly how much activity is being used, but it is very little.
Oh, okay. I have another one, again for CorreLog. Is the transfer to the CIEM automated or batch?
This is George. I can take that. It's the SIEM. Regardless of which SIEM product that you use, CorreLog certified partners with all of the top SIEM products like QRadar and so on and so forth, all the big ones out there. And all of those events are sent over in real time. What Peter was showing you is all of those events coming to our SIEM, but if you had any of the other ones that I mentioned in the list that I had, HP, IBM, Splunk, RSA, we take the events, and as they occur at that very second is when they go off to the other SIEM. And that's kind of how we bridge that gap that I was talking about earlier. It's not batch anymore. It's real time, just as if you're getting events from a firewall or a router.
Great. Okay. Jim, I think I have one here on the survey. In the article, there's a chart for the type of security threats. So as a vendor seeing this firsthand, are you also seeing authorized users as the big threat? And kind of what should, as a chief information security officer, what should I be on the lookout for?
Well, it is a big threat, obviously. I mean, we've read about it over the last several years, and more recently, the NSA isn't immune to authorized users, taking off with data. So I think that Peter and George actually did a great job of explaining the kind of damage they can do, but also how you can track that in real time, especially with the use of dashboards. So I think tools such as the one from CorreLog are very important, and I'm not a pitchman for CorreLog or anything, but no, I think that having those types of tools available are key, as well as establishing authorization levels, read, write, whatever the case.
Okay. I think this one's interesting too, Jim, and maybe Doug wants to weigh in, but you rarely read about mobile points of intrusion, and this is a point made by one of our attendees. Should I really be that concerned about mobile with regard to mainframe security?
Doug, you can handle that one.
Well, I mean, certainly I think the folks who we sent the survey to are concerned about it. I mean, if I remember correctly, it was like data privacy, I think, was the number one mobile concern. Access control, I think, was next. And then, we talked about this kind of at length, but mobile device loss or theft. And to me, kind of the access control kind of goes hand in hand with that. So, and maybe it's just because I lose stuff, but I do have concerns about mobile device loss and or theft, and in particular because it used to be that each of us had one device maybe that we accessed our organization's data on, whether that's email or what have you, or a database. I don't think it's unreasonable today to assume that an employee could have 1, 2, even 3 devices: a laptop, a tablet, and a phone. Which to me, when you have that kind of proliferation from a device standpoint, there's more opportunity for device loss or theft, and for a lack of access control. So, clearly, I think mobile is an issue, and I think one that the readership said was a concern of theirs.
Okay. And George, I'm going to let you direct this question to the appropriate person.
If I could jump in before you go on, there were a couple of. There's a presentation that I give also, which points out a couple of breaches that happened on the mainframe, and one of the reasons that we had implemented our ability to track down to the IP address in our product is because both of those breaches that we showed were done via a handheld device. So it's very important that you have something that you don't have to end. It took 200 and some odd days to be tracked, to be found. So that's why real time comes into play, and knowing where that data came or that breach came from, not just on the SNA address, but the ability to track it all the way back to the end user. Sorry, go ahead.
No, great point. So I think this might also get to your point. Here's the question. The presentation deals with detective mode. How about real-time protective actions? For example, canceling a user with sysadmin authority, attempting to delete a critical database.
That's another very good point. CorreLog has action capability built or based upon any event that occurs, whether that's a particular message or a correlated message. Peter, perhaps, you can talk a little bit maybe more on how it could go back to the mainframe. I think some recent, we can certainly do some automated actions on the distributed platforms, but more recently, we added some functionality to the mainframe side. Are we able to talk about that yet, Peter? Or?
Yeah, I could mention it, but I mean the version of the tool that I presented today is just doing it passively, so it's just monitoring immediately after the fact. Now it all happens in real time, and we would obviously do alerts, email and SMS text messages and things like that to alert people that something has happened. But you're right, what I presented today was monitoring something after the event, so it wouldn't prevent anyone from deleting a database. But we do have a new release of the product that'll be coming out hopefully by Q1 next year, where we do have the ability to intercept things. We're actually more tied, rather than monitoring things through SMF records, we're more tied to DB2. We can go into the DB2 control block, see what activity is going on, and we can actually prevent it, because we get the access to the control block before the SQL gets executed, and if we see something we want to prevent, we can actually stop that, and then if necessary we could issue some kind of log off command to get rid of that user. So we're working on that. We don't have it available yet, but it is coming.
Great. Thank you.
I see we have reached the top of the hour, and that's all we have time for today. Thank you to our attendees for your thoughtful questions. We really appreciate the participation. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and I want to thank Doug and Jim, and especially George and Peter, all for sharing their expertise with us today. Later this week, we will be sending out a link to a recording of today's webinar to everyone who registered for the event, and we'll also be including in that follow-up email the links to the survey that Doug referred to earlier in the presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's webinar. You may now disconnect your lines.